clock on my phone flashed 5:14 a.m. I quietly pulled myself out of bed, careful not to wake Juana. Her arm was draped over me, and I didn't want to disturb the peaceful stillness of the moment. I had spent the night at her place, a brief and fiery connection that was more about physical attraction than anything else. Juana was beautiful, too beautiful to be doing what she was doing with me. But I had to admit, our situation was just easier than being in an actual relationship. She wasn't looking for anything real, and neither was I. I slipped out of bed, making sure to move as quietly as possible, my bare feet making no sound on the hardwood floor. I grabbed my clothes from the chair where I had left them the night before, getting dressed in the dim light. I felt guilty sneaking out like this, but I had to get back before Eliana woke up. She was the one I cared about. I drove back to the house, my thoughts swirling. What was I doing? What was I looking for? I didn't even know anymore. My life had become a string of these late-night escapes, each one just a little bit emptier than the last. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw the lights on in the kitchen. She was already up, no doubt preparing for the day ahead. I didn't have to explain myself to her. She already knew how things worked, but she never asked too many questions. I was sure she had her suspicions, but she'd raised me to know that sometimes it was easier to leave certain things unsaid. I slipped into the house, careful not to wake Eliana. I peeked into her room, finding her curled up, still fast asleep. My heart swelled at the sight of her innocence. This was what mattered. Not the distractions, not the fleeting connections. I heard the sound of humming in the kitchen, and I walked toward it, finding my mom at the stove. She was already up and dressed, as always. No surprises there. The smell of coffee filled the air, and I immediately felt comforted by it. "Morning, Ethan," she said without looking up. "How was your night?" I winced inwardly but kept my voice light. "It was fine, Mom. Just fine." She paused for a second, her back still turned. "I see." I winced again, sensing the familiar shift in the air. My mom, a woman of few words but a keen sense of intuition, always knew when something was off. She didn't need the details. She could tell by the way I carried myself, the weight in my eyes. "You're up early," I said, trying to change the subject, although I knew she was perfectly aware of my habits by now. "I never sleep in when you're out," she said simply, stirring a pot of oatmeal. "I've been up preparing breakfast for my sleepyhead grandbaby." I gave her a grateful smile, knowing Eliana was in the best hands. "Thanks, Mom." She met my gaze for a moment, her expression soft but steady. "Ethan, you can't keep doing this. You can't keep running after women who you know aren't right for you." I felt the familiar frustration rise in my chest, but I bit my tongue. "I'm not running after anyone, Mom," I muttered, sitting down at the table. Her eyes never left me. "You say that, but I can see it in your eyes. You're looking for something you haven't found yet, and in the meantime, you're surrounding yourself with distractions." She sighed and leaned back in her chair. "I don't know if you're doing it because you're lonely or because you're still grieving Nina." I clenched my jaw, resisting the urge to snap back. Bringing up Nina, Eliana's mother, was still a sensitive topic. It's been 2 years since her death in the accident. "I know what matters," I said quietly, "and I know what I'm doing." She didn't push further, but the tension between us was palpable. I wasn't ready to talk about it, not now. I stood up and made my way to the couch, not wanting to sit idle. I felt her eyes follow me, but I didn't care to meet her gaze again. As I sank into the couch cushions, my mind wandered back to Books Brew. Twain, the new art history instructor who had wandered into my bookstore the other day. I hadn't been able to shake the way she looked at me, like she saw something more than just a man working behind a counter. There was something about her, the way she talked about books and art, how she spoke so thoughtfully about Hemingway. I hadn't had a conversation like that in a while. I wanted to get to know her more, but I couldn't tell if I was just drawn to the idea of her or if I was really ready to face what that might mean. Just as I was lost in thought, I heard soft footsteps from the hallway. Eliana emerged, rubbing her eyes, looking like the picture of innocence. She flashed me a sleepy smile as she stumbled over to me. "Daddy," she mumbled, "is it morning already?" I grinned and scooped her up, sitting her on my lap. "Yep, it sure is, kiddo. You ready for some breakfast?" She nodded, her eyes still half closed. I kissed the top of her head, feeling a deep sense of love and protectiveness that swelled in my chest. She was everything that mattered. My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me out of my thoughts. I looked at the screen, half expecting it to be a message from Juana, but it wasn't. It was a text from the bookstore. New delivery of books today? Be there at 9? I rubbed my face and sighed, letting the phone slip back into my pocket. The bookstore was my responsibility, and it was where I spent most of my days. But I couldn't stop thinking about Ava. And yet, even as my heart pulled toward her, I knew I wasn't ready to give up the life I'd been living. Not yet. I arrived at Books Brew just as the sun started to warm up the morning chill. The shop was still quiet, the morning crowd a slow trickle of early risers and coffee seekers. I unlocked the door and flipped the sign to open, the sound of the bell chiming as I stepped inside. The familiar scent of books and coffee hit me, grounding me in a way that was oddly comforting. I was still thinking about my mom's words from earlier, how she'd called me out on my choices. I wasn't ready to face that yet, not when my life was already complicated. My focus shifted to the store, where there was work to be done. But of course, as usual, I was soon distracted. Angela walked in shortly after. She was a model type, tall, flawless skin, and a kind of confidence that only came from someone who knew they were beautiful. I had seen her around the neighborhood before, and I knew she occasionally came in for coffee. I couldn't help but notice the way she scanned the shelves, her heels clicking against the floor as she wandered toward me, her eyes locking with mine. "Morning, Ethan," Angela said, her voice soft and playful. She gave me a sultry smile, clearly aware of the effect she had on me. I wasn't blind. She was attractive. Too attractive to just let her slip away without a little attention. "Morning, Angela," I said, leaning casually against the counter. "What's on your mind today?" She stepped closer, resting her arms on the counter. "I'm going to the cafe to get my usual," she said, letting her fingers brush lightly against mine. "And can I get your number? I've been thinking about getting to know you better." I smiled, knowing exactly where this was going. It was all part of the game. I knew how to play it, how to charm someone like her. I reached for my phone without hesitation and handed it to her. "Sure thing," I said with a grin. "I'll text you later." She typed something quickly, handing my phone back with a wink. "I'll be waiting," she said with a soft laugh before heading toward the cafe counter to grab her drink. I watched her go, a sense of unease creeping up on me. It was too easy, too simple, and as much as I hated to admit it, I felt a little embarrassed. There was something about it that didn't sit right, something shallow about the exchange. But then again, what did I expect? A woman like Angela wasn't looking for anything real. She wasn't interested in me beyond the surface. Just as I was pushing that thought away, the door chimed again, and I turned to see Ava walk in. There she was. Ava, the new art history instructor from the Art Institute. She entered quietly, her eyes scanning the space as if taking in every detail, appreciating the warmth of the place. I watched her as she wandered around the store, her small, purposeful steps leading her through the aisles. She was dressed in a simple yet stylish outfit, something casual but elegant. She had that understated beauty that didn't demand attention, but still commanded it. I noticed her linger by the bookshelves, running her fingers over the spines of the books. My pulse quickened a little as I watched her, wondering if she would come up to the counter again. She eventually made her way to the cafe counter, where I knew the baristas would take her order. When she returned to the front counter, she was holding her chai and a book, one I immediately recognized, Sweat by Zora Neale Hurston. "Hey," she said as she placed the book down in front of me, her voice calm and warm. "I thought I'd pick this up. I've read Their Eyes Were Watching God, and I loved it, but I've never gotten around to reading Sweat." I smiled at her choice, impressed by her knowledge. "Good pick. Sweat is incredible. It's a bit different from Their Eyes Were Watching God, but Hurston's writing is always powerful." Ava nodded as if she was savoring the thought. "I've always wanted to read more of her work. I was just waiting for the right time to pick it up. I think you'll enjoy it. It's raw in its own way, but still filled with the depth Hurston is known for." I glanced at the book again, feeling a slight sense of admiration. "You've got good taste in books." Ava's eyes sparkled, a light laugh escaping her lips. "I think it's hard not to appreciate the classics. There's so much more than the mainstream stuff, but I can't say I'm not guilty of picking up a romance novel from time to time. I grinned, feeling more at ease with her than I had in a long time. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Everyone needs an escape. Ava smiled softly, and for a moment, I found myself just standing there, looking at her, trying to figure out why I was so drawn to her. The conversation was light and friendly, but there was something deeper there, something I couldn't explain. As she left the counter, I couldn't help but feel a sense of disappointment that I couldn't place. There was something in the way she carried herself, something that made me want to know her better. But she wasn't my type. She didn't fit the mold of the women I usually went for. No flashy allure, no sharp energy. She was more grounded, thoughtful. Not the kind of woman I typically sought, but somehow I couldn't get her out of my head. I took a deep breath and returned to my work, trying to shake the feeling off. As much as I told myself she wasn't my type, I knew that I couldn't stop thinking about her. I even felt embarrassed now, holding Angela's number in my hand. The interaction with her had felt so trivial compared to what I'd just experienced with Ava, even if it was just a quick, casual exchange. I couldn't explain it, but there was something about Ava that made me want to figure it out. And for once, I didn't mind the idea of getting lost in the mystery.